if you don't want to be seen, feel free to switch off your cameras. So welcome everybody to this thematic workshop on new No One Left Behind products, which we're really excited to share with you. My name is Pegs Bailey, and I'm the National Third Sector Employability Partnership Engagement Manager. And this session is kind of a co-hosted with my colleague Susie Donkin from the Improvement Service. And give us a wave, Susie. And Marie and Susan Harvie from Scottish Government. Do you want to give us a wave? And then also the wonderful Jane from Social Enterprise Scotland, who is kindly acting as our host for the most, and who will help share the recording of this so that it will be accessible to everybody, and you can share it beyond those of you that are here. We're really keen that this is a session that is useful to everybody for posterity, let's say. So without further ado, I need to find my way to the slides so I can move us on. So in terms of this session, this is going to be an opportunity to hear, for those of you that are familiar with it, apologies, but just a reminder of the strategic background of the policy context to No One Left Behind and employability in Scotland. Always useful to just keep reminding ourselves of how it works here. It's different. And then a look at the No One Left Behind Products Handbook, some of the established elements, and then the new service standard annex, which is particularly around specialist employment support, which is a really important kind of development in terms of policy implementation, and then a refreshed local employability partnership framework and new guidance on commissioning and good practice in commissioning employability services. And then finally, the online communications toolkit. So lots of exciting developments and projects, all developed collaboratively, and there will be time for questions in between. Feel free to use the chat, or when we pause, you can raise your hand. But my job is partly to keep us on time, but I might rely on others to do that when I'm speaking. So I'll look to my colleagues for that. Okay, so without further ado, I am going to hand over to Susan, I believe, to talk about the kind of policy background.
Thank you, Pegs. So I thought it would be useful just to share some background and outline the journey so far. So we've been through an important period for devolved employability services in recent years, and since the Scottish and local government partnership working agreement was signed in December 2018, we've worked in partnership to deliver our shared ambitions for place-based, person-centred employability support in Scotland. Since April 2024, all new referrals to devolved employability services have been through No One Left Behind, and we have welcomed the commitment from all involved in continuing to drive improvements to support better outcomes for the people and communities across Scotland. Now, it's clear that we continue to experience challenges, including levels of child poverty that is too high, rising economic inactivity due to long-term sickness, and employment rates for disabled people that continues to lag behind non-disabled people. And employability through partnership working continues to have a crucial role to play in addressing these labour market challenges. So we've developed a delivery model for devolved support in Scotland that has partnership at its core and that strengthens alignment between national and local funding. Local employability partnerships are the keystone of this approach, bringing together a range of agencies, organisations and partners to plan and implement provision in their area. Local employability partnerships have a critical role to play in the planning and commissioning of services locally, allowing decisions to be taken closer to participants and enabling local labour market conditions to more closely shape the provision on offer. So with the development of the No One Left Behind, our approach to delivery within Scottish Government has also changed. Our relationship managers work closely alongside local authorities to understand delivery on the ground and regularly attend LEP meetings as part of our implementation activity. If we can move on to the next slide, please, Pegs. Okay, so our 3-year strategic plan published in September 2024 set out our joint priorities with local government for Scotland's devolved employability services. And you can see on the slide the priority 1, continue to improve the employability system Scottish Government and local government and COSLA will work together with partners to ensure that local commissioning frameworks and funding models are open and inclusive and supporting a mixed economy of provision. 5 main priority areas were established and 2 emerging areas, which reflects the ministerial ambitions set out in the programme for government. These priorities are underpinned by the principles of no one left behind in everything we take forward. We must ensure we're driving towards creating an employability system which reflects these. The plan also outlines our commitment to publish annual updates, and we're pleased to say that our first annual report was published on the 16th of December 2025. So each action, each priority contains a number of short, medium or long-term actions. The actions have been collectively taken forward by Scottish Government and local government through a number of expert groups, which include members of the public, third and private sectors, and people with lived experience. Where relevant, the groups have led on the development of guidance frameworks and tools that aim to support and design and delivery of employability services. We can move to the next slide, please. Okay. So, as you'll be aware, the Scottish Government announced and published its budget for 2026-27 on Tuesday the 13th of January. The draft budget protects the Government's investment in devolved employability services up to 90 million in the 2026-27. So this will enable local employability partnerships to continue to support people experiencing barriers to employment to move towards and into sustainable fair work. 30 million for all age employability support. We continue to embed person-centred support as a core principle through the no one left behind approach to employability services, working closely with partners to promote flexible working practices. 40.2 million for parental support in this year, which will continue to ensure that every local authority area has specific support in place for parents, with a key focus on the 6 priority groups most at risk for experiencing poverty. And we've got 5 million for specialist employability support. So it's part of programme for government, the commitment and our commitment to halving the disability employment gap. Specialist employment support for disabled people is now in place across all 32 local authorities. The draft budget will allow us to maintain our investment in the delivery of specialist employability support for disabled people as a core element of our efforts to reduce economic inactivity in Scotland. In addition to this, we will continue to invest 2.5 million for child poverty coordinator roles across the country to drive alignment and integration between employability support and the wraparound service required to support parents to increase their income from employment. So I'm just going to pass it over to Marie, who's going to give an overview of the No One Left Behind Products Handbook.
Thanks, Susan. So increasing awareness and uptake of employability support was identified as priority 2 of the employability strategic plan. Under this priority, an action to raise awareness of No One Left Behind tools and products amongst strategic funding and delivery partners by developing a handbook to ensure that the standards are upheld and a consistent approach to planning and data and reporting was agreed. To address this action, the improvement group, which consists of members from Scottish Government, local government and third sector, agreed that developing a national products handbook would be the best way forward. Can we move on to the next slide? Thank you. So the handbook was designed in partnership between the Scottish local government and third sector, with the first iteration published in January of 2025 on the Improvement Service website. It's aimed at employability providers across Scotland and brings existing No One Left Behind resources into one place. It includes No One Left Behind products such as the Customer Charter. This product was co-designed with employability service users and agreed by partners across the public, third and private sectors. It sets out what service users can expect of services in a way that is easy for users to understand. The handbook also includes products such as the LET framework and the commissioning guidance, which Susie and Pegs will go into further detail about later in the session, as well as many more of our key resources. The handbook explains what the resources are, how they fit together, and suggests how and when they can be used by delivery partners. Partners are encouraged to use these resources and adapt them to best suit local needs. Through their use, the intention is to enable a clear understanding of expectations, standards and commitments for employability services. This aims to deliver consistency while retaining the ability to develop and deliver services flexibly and in line with local needs and improve outcomes for employability participants. The products noted in the handbook are subject to our shared continuous improvement agenda, and since publication, a number of products have already been reviewed. Can we move on to the next slide, please? One of the products which have been reviewed already is and refreshed is the No One Left Behind service standards. So the service standards was initially published in 2021 and was developed collaboratively across public, third and private sectors to support consistent, high-quality delivery of employability services in Scotland. They promote coherence while allowing local employability partnerships to flexibly tailor services to local needs. Can we move to the next slide, please? In July of 2025, specialist employability support was introduced under No One Left Behind to enhance employment support for disabled people and those with long-term health conditions. SES ensures that every LEP offers strengthened support to help more disabled individuals access and sustain meaningful employment. A dedicated service standard was created by a cross-sector working group to guide LEPs in implementing SES. So all of these products which I've touched on will continue to be reviewed and refreshed when appropriate, and there is currently work ongoing to refresh the ERI framework. The handbook can be found on the Improvement Service website and is currently being updated to include some of the recent refreshed products such as the service standards, the LEP framework, and new products like the Good Practice guidance for commissioning employability services in Scotland and the Good Practice guidance on communicating employability services. We also have been working to improve the accessibility of the handbook, and it will be shortly uploaded to the Improvement Service within the next couple of days. And I'll pass on to Pegs now, who will talk more about the SMF framework, I think.
Hi, yeah, thanks so much for that, Marie. And absolutely, we'll send out the refreshed products handbook link as soon as anybody wants. And also, if anybody wants to ask questions about other parts of it, just let us know, some of the kind of more established bits. We can try and pick that up. In terms of the shared measurement framework, I guess just wanting to highlight this was put in place as a tool to try and help us create a national way of measuring the impact, the reach of No One Left Behind funding and funded services, and allowing that to kind of capture the local variability and flexibility that we want to achieve with No One Left Behind. The original framework was put in place in around 2020. It is really at the moment mostly kind of focused around a data reporting template, which is like a Excel spreadsheet. However, one of the commitments in the strategic plan is to review and refine the shared measurement framework. And so there is a working group kind of underway and beginning to look at what could be put in place to help us kind of move forward to the next phase of how we create this kind of collective understanding of our impact and reach. So I suppose it's just to really flag that for people. It is a big document. At the moment, it does require a lot of effort for those of you in local authorities that have to complete it. You know that. I say this for the providers that might sometimes grumble about the level of detail they're being asked to provide or the level of detail they're being asked to capture from the people they're supporting. At the moment, this is absolutely what is required. If you get No One Left Behind funding, it's not optional. So please do kind of have a little bit more sympathy for those that are having to collect that data because, yeah, it just is what it is right now. I don't know if there's anything else to add on that, Susie, or whether that's enough for now. And we can just say this is watch this space, work in progress. Okay. So I'm going to pause there. I haven't put a slide in to pause for questions, but I guess just to pause if there are any questions around that national context, the budget, or the general products handbook. I'm going to stop sharing and just give us 5 minutes just to see if there's any questions in the chat or if anybody would like to put their hand up and ask a question. We're a very friendly bunch, but this is being recorded, so do bear that in mind. Epi.
Yeah, Pegs, you may have already answered the question in the presentation there. I put a question in the chat just asking about the specialist support. Is that specifically disability? Yes. By definition? Okay, great. Thank you.
And long-term health conditions, yes.
Oh, okay, right. Okay,
is emphatically around the disability employment gap. It's emphatically around health-related barriers. Yeah. It's not to say there aren't other amazing specialist bits of provision, but those would sit in some of those other spaces and places. Yeah, sure. Any other questions? Okay. Well, feel free to pop them in the chat if and as and when they come up, and I will go back to sharing the presentation and hand over, I think, to Susie to introduce the Local Employability Partnership Framework.
Thank you very much, Pegs, and thanks to Susan and Marie for admirably setting the scene and for already explaining the strategic plan and the annual report. So one of the actions in the strategic plan, the priority one was in continuing to improve the employability system, was to review the LEP framework to ensure clarity of roles and responsibilities, to support further capacity building and strengthening representation across communities and sectors. Now, it has been around, the LEP partnership framework. I'm just going to call it the LEP framework from now on for simplicity. Has been around since, I think, 2020. So it was a wee bit out of date. It was essentially a tick list of how your LEP should be set up, membership, purpose, meeting format, and was set against the backdrop of COVID and the Young Person's Guarantee. Remember back then? Next slide, please, Pegs. So the new all singing, all dancing framework was developed by a cross-sector working group, led by a subgroup from the Scottish Government Local Government Improvement Group, of which Peg sits on as well. Then it was extended out to partners from third sector, Skills Development Scotland, DWP, and Health, along with Scottish Government Local Government reps, who attended a kind of initial joint workshop in March 2025. So we reviewed the original LEP framework and agreed on the important themes and principles that should be covered in the updated framework. So it wasn't just about updating the tick list. It was about really understanding where we were and what we needed to keep moving forward. So the subgroup agreed that the new framework would follow the same themes as the LEP maturity assessment that had been carried out towards the end of 2024. Every single local employability partnership, the majority of partners took part in that kind of towards the autumn and winter of 2024. It also took some of the lessons and best practice learned over the years and considered different stages that LEPs are at. Obviously, some LEPs were quite new back in 2020. Some had been around since 2000 or thereabouts, just under a different name. So it was really taken into account where people had got to, where they were still aiming to get to, and not kind of just that tick list that says this is what you should do. Throughout the process, the various iterations were reviewed by partners to ensure that everyone was on the same page and were invested in the new framework. It was really important that everyone bought into it and that it represented everyone's perspective. So throughout, when it was reviewed by different groups, the LEP chairs, the Slade People Exec, the TSI and TSEF reps, and senior managers in Scottish Government, SDS, DWP and Health. So it now follows the same themes from the LEP maturity assessment, leadership and relationships, governance, blah, 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 as well as offering some insight to the latest guidance on effective partnership working, the roles and responsibilities of key partners, and a handy checklist to help every LEP develop their own local terms of reference, which really guides their activity. The document intends to support strengthened collaboration across all partners and all LEPs, building on and encouraging more sharing of best practice. We absolutely don't do enough of that. And it's one of the really effective ways of learning. Also, we don't share enough failures. So can you share in the challenges rather than the wins is really useful as well. So basically the refreshed framework lays out that this is a joint responsibility, not just for the local authority to lead, but for all partners to play their part, sharing resources and intelligence to ensure that the employability offer meets the needs of the community. Next slide, Pegs, please. So the first section, leadership and relationships. Trusted relationships and shared purpose and vision are the foundation stones of any partnership, and without this, there may be trouble ahead. The first section of the framework focuses on the value of investing in relationships, having the right people around the table, a clear structure that everyone understands and supports, and ensuring that everyone is confident in their role in the partnership. It's really important that everyone feels listened to, heard, are able to challenge, are able to put their perspective across, and that is considered across all the discussions. It also suggests how to support collective and collaborative leadership, where everyone has a valuable contribution to make, and it's okay to debate, disagree, and challenge each other as long as it's constructive and serves a purpose. Next slide, please, Pegs. So I think you'll all agree there's great power in having shared purpose and values in partnerships. We've all been in meetings and working groups where we feel we've not been valued or heard. And I'm sure we've had experience of meetings and events where you've come away thinking, how good was that meeting? How constructive? What a lot we got done. So it's really clear that the more you invest in building relationships, building trust, and sharing a clear goal, how much more valuable and sustainable the outcomes are. Decision making is much easier. You've got a clearer direction. We're all working together for the same goal, and everything just seems more worthwhile. If you didn't put the effort into building that shared purpose and trust, then it's your communities that suffer. Through mixed messaging, lack of joint ownership, and lack of progress when it comes to taking forward actions. I think I'm handing back to Pegs now, who'll take you through the next couple of sections.
Thanks, Susie. And I'm regretting taking out some of my slides now. We were worried about timing and I whipped out loads of slides. Now I'm like, darn. So I'm going to talk a little bit about governance. So Susie mentioned the importance of trust. It comes through again and again and again when we talk about what is kind of the foundations for effective partnership working, but also the foundations for effective delivery on the ground, effective creation of ecosystems of support which actually interconnect and talk to one another rather than kind of working in silos. And it's really clear that having clear and effective governance structures is kind of like a really important foundation for building trust, and that in turn then will support effective delivery for people that are seeking support. So sometimes we hear people say, and maybe this is a third sector provider thing, just trust us, we are going to do a good job. But actually there's something about trusting it, but verifying, and actually our ability to prove that we are being trustworthy will build trust. And so actually that governance process is an important part of the building of the trust. My daughter says, trust me, a lot. And I'm not sure that her behaviors, when I try and verify, support that trust. So some of the things that the framework talks about which help build good governance. So having clear lines of accountability are absolutely critical. So being clear about where the partnership sits within its local community planning partnership frameworks, how it connects to other related partnership frameworks within the area, and also how it might connect to regional decision-making structures where that's appropriate. It's also really useful having clear roles and responsibilities. So this is an important thing that we did. It's the first time it's ever been done, I think, in terms of these partnership guidance. We've actually developed clear roles and responsibilities for all the key stakeholders that are expected to be members of a local employability partnership. So that includes local authorities, third sector reps, Skills Development Scotland colleagues, DWP colleagues who are all on this call as well. Susie will talk a little bit more about that, I think, further on in the presentation. But I think having that clear so everybody knows what they can and can't expect of each other is super helpful within the partnership, but it's also helpful for people outside the partnership, and especially I think for the third sector providers. I think knowing what you can and can't expect of your rep on your local employability partnership is critical. The other important thing about being on a partnership is that that role, that presence needs to be meaningful. It's not enough for someone to just come and participate and kind of be a head around the table. It's really important that people feel able to contribute, feel confident to contribute, and do contribute, even if sometimes that might at times feel uncomfortable. That is important. That you know, we want all of these different perspectives there, because that's what makes the governance effective. It's not effective governance if we don't have the different voices in the room chipping in. Areas that have established subgroup structures get really positive feedback about how that's helping wider stakeholders get involved, how that's helping progress sort of specific targeted work streams relevant to the area. And those can be kind of systemic ones like commissioning and oversight, or they could be focused on the needs of a particular client group like young people or parents or whatever it might be for that area. So I think, yeah, we're really kind of keen to advocate the role of subgroup structures. In terms of governance, we all know the importance of risk assessment, but sometimes it can drop to the bottom of the pile. But that risk assessment is absolutely critical from a partnership perspective, especially let's look at the moment. We've got the loss of UK Shared Prosperity Fund coming to lots of areas across Scotland. The LEP being on the front foot with that, thinking about what the impact of that might be for the wider ecosystem of support is really important. So that kind of ongoing live approach to risk assessment is really, really important. And then finally, the guidance also talks about making it easy for people to participate. And this is really simple stuff. Like, none of this is rocket science. It's like planning the meetings ahead for the year so that everybody knows when they are and can keep that protected space in their diary, maybe not cancelling them at short notice, ensuring there are papers that are transparent and accessible, and so on. Really kind of simple but practical tools which make a really big difference to transparency and people's ability to engage. The third section looks at data and evidence. So the most important thing here is it talks about the value of planning early. Sometimes that might be something like a year to 18 months beforehand, in fact, so not even just a year, you know. But although we may not know what our budgets are for the year and a half ahead, we probably still have a good idea what the issues are. And if we can collate our collective data and intelligence and actually understand what those issues are for our area, then that means that when the money does come through, we're going to be in a much better place to spend it wisely and to maximum impact. Within that early planning and the use of data and evidence, that's not just about the kind of the quantitative data that we might be used to thinking about, the demographics data. That is critical, of course, because the demographics of Glasgow is highly different to the demographic challenges of Highlands, where I live, for example. But there's also this kind of more qualitative data, which we can get through service design approaches, where we're actually beginning to engage with other parts of the intelligence space, if you like. We gather the intelligence of the people that are using services or the people that might want to use services. We gather information from that space and use that to help us make our decisions about what matters in our area and why. So really important, this service design approach to planning and getting that kind of more active in areas is mentioned here. I think whilst having that long-term view, if any of us who work in this arena will know, we recognise that things change. Funding streams disappear, businesses appear, opportunities arise and challenges occur. And so whilst we're having that long-term view, it's also really important that partnerships have ability to flex and adapt and kind of factor that in a little bit to their forward planning. So kind of long-term planning with this flexibility. And finally, I think a big plea for me around data and evidence is that when we're engaging with data and evidence, that we continue to do that from a learning mindset. Like, what are we learning from this data? What useful information can we get to help us think about what we want to do next and how we want to grow and improve the pathway around employability in our area? Sometimes in the land of employability, we have tended to use data as a bit of a performative thing. You're like, oh, look, we've got the outcomes, tick, everything's fine. And I think that can lead us to a certain level of kind of hitting the mark but maybe missing the point approach to thinking about our data. But if we kind of bring that curious learning mindset, then we're always going to be in the right space when we engage with it. I think this is still me. So last one for me is talking about stakeholders and resources. So it's not just about those people that are within the partnership, but that is important, and that everybody is bringing their kind of whole resources, their whole kind of agenda to the table. But it's also about thinking about the resources that are needed to sustain the partnership so that it can do its job well. So that might be things like admin support or having a partnership manager. And again, many areas do that now to great effect. And it really has kind of turbo boosted the partnership, I would say, in those areas. But other things that come in here are about kind of wider engagement, wider stakeholders and resources. So just having clear lines and approaches and an open mindset to engaging with things like maybe your tackling child poverty partnership or your economy partnerships or whoever it might be. Local employers are absolutely critical. So yeah, I think just the key point on this is taking an open mindset, but having that learning and kind of investment approach to kind of thinking that this partnership needs effort and energy to keep it going. I'm probably not going to say anything more about that. I think I'm going to, oh yeah, no, I did. I have one more point I wanted to make. In here, we talk about communication. So I think it's really important. Sometimes within the partnership, the LEP, communication may not be great. It might be, decisions might get made and it's not quite clear how or why that's happened. But also outside a partnership, transparency and having routes to communication are also very important. And the framework talks a bit about that. So how do we make it so that everybody in the area knows who's funded for what? Do we have plans in place to think about communicating what our strategic priorities are so that organizations might actually be able to draw in other funds that help us meet those needs? So kind of thinking about how the LEP is communicating its priorities, communicating what it's up to is also an important part of what we do here. So now I'm going to hand over to Susie.
Thank you very much. So this last section, or the last main section that's in the LEP framework, really, I suppose, touches on everything that we've just said around the trust and building effective partnerships. And there's no point in having an effective partnership if you can't measure your performance, outcomes, and impact. So bringing into play all the data. It's really important that each LEP establishes a minimum level of performance data for funded provision that should be shared with LEP partners, or at the very least a subgroup who can provide a level of assurance on delivery. There's no point in funding a project year on year if it's not actually delivering. And the other thing that performance data gives you is a way to be able to offer support where things are not working so well. I suppose that's the big role of the LEP is to make sure that things are working, to be able to bring their intelligence and their experience into play to make sure that things are working locally. So one of the suggestions, or the last section is full of kind of, I suppose, good practice examples and suggestions of how you can do some of this, make the LEP accountable. And one of the suggestions is that a mid-year review and evaluation of funded activity should be undertaken by every LEP to help understand performance and relevance to local priorities, and also that it will help inform future delivery plans. As Peg says, communication and information sharing processes should be developed and agreed by all LEP members, not just about that internal communication, but external. How are you communicating what is being delivered and what is working and what's not working? It's really important that these processes are developed around reviewing performance and outcomes to evidence that the activity represents value for money, it reduces duplication and meets the needs of each community. There are loads of tools available that can be used to review service and to help to plan future delivery, from the No One Left Behind Data Toolkit, which brings together loads of data sources about child poverty, about school attainment, about just general population and demographics. And then you've got the data provided through the participant data quarterly return, as Peg said, part of the shared measurement framework. You've got participant data, you've got finance data for every funding stream, you've got narrative about policy intent that has to be submitted every quarter. So you've got a whole wealth of data and information at your fingertips. But especially, we need to look at feedback from local providers and service users. We need to understand about the quality of the services that are being delivered, not just whether it's helping people towards and into employment or helping them to access college courses or training, but what is the quality? Is it actually sustainable improvement that it's bringing to the area? LEP members should have access to this data to ensure that future planning is transparent and supported by evidence. And it's also really important that we keep an eye to make sure that it's meeting the needs of the community. Next. Okay, so then we're on to the annexes. One of the annexes is around roles and responsibilities, and in fact it's two annexes, I think. There's a summary section and then full versions of partner responsibilities that have all been drawn up by the respective partners and representatives who sit on LEPs. So there's local authorities as both lead accountable bodies and as partners. There's DWP, there's Skills Development Scotland, Health, and there's kind of 3 sections in health, and then you've got Scottish Government and what their role on the LEP is, and of course you've got third sector representation. Next slide, Pegs, please. So we've not got time to go through all of them, so we've just picked out a few. We've selected the local authority as the lead accountable body and the LEP role, and also third sector responsibilities, which Pegs will take you through in a wee minute. So whilst the local authority may put in some core or other additional funding to support employability delivery in their area, the local authority manage no one left behind funding on behalf of the LEP. So it's not the council's funding, it basically, it's the responsibility of the LEP. They're responsible for ensuring that the local authority as lead accountable body are responsible for ensuring that the funds are spent in line with grant offer letter regulations. They are the ones that must collate and submit the annual investment plan, which should have been developed by the LEP. They provide budget forecasting, they complete the quarterly reporting on spend, count yourself lucky that's not you, and they also complete or fill in the questions around policy intent and participant data. The local authority regularly meet and respond to additional asks from Scottish Government implementation team, whether that's around case studies or whether it's around clarification of data or anything that they've put in their reports. And each local authority has a nominated Scottish Government relationship manager. The local authority employability leads attend the Laid People meetings, which is the kind of network of employability leads from across the country, who meet monthly, and they feed in anything relevant to the wider group and also are responsible for bringing information back to the LEP. The LEP also have a number of very important responsibilities. They must collectively agree local priorities and strategy based on local evidence of need, and in turn should be leading the service design process. They're responsible for developing and signing off the annual investment plan and for ensuring that local resources are used appropriately and for maximum impact. Whilst the local authority will have strict governance and processes in place around what they can and can't do in relation to awarding funds and commissioning services, the LEP has a role to play in agreeing the priorities for spend and having input into deciding the award of funds. They also have an important role to play in the governance and oversight of delivery. Now, looking back at the LEP maturity assessment, it was a kind of dichotomy of responses where you had local authority partners saying that they didn't feel some other partners were involved as much as they should be. And then the other side of that was other partners, third sector, DWP or SDS or whoever were saying they felt that their LEP was being more led by the local authority. Now, the new updated LEP framework aims to address that and to give everyone that kind of equity of input into the LEP and decisions in their area. I'm going to hand back to Pegs for her insight on the role of the third sector reps on the LEP.
Brilliant. And so this is the last slide on the LEP framework. And I just want to say very importantly, so DWP and SDS colleagues, it's not because we don't love you and value your roles and responsibilities that we haven't prioritized making time for them here. They are in the document and you all play such an important role. So I don't want you to feel hurt. But this was a particularly interesting and in some ways actually quite challenging bit of the roles and responsibilities to develop. So I wanted to take a bit of time to talk about that because there's something unique about the third sector reps on LEPs in that they are not representing one organisation. They're there to represent lots of different organisations, and those lots of different organisations may be large, may be small, maybe social enterprises may specialise in particular areas. And so actually they have this kind of quite tricky and knotty role in that they need to represent quite a diversity of views. And they're quite often not funded to do that. Although that is changing, and thank you to all local authorities who are funding posts within your TSIs to help them do this work well. It does make a difference. So what we have agreed is that there are kind of two core functions that any third sector rep on a local employability partnership should be able to and should be doing. And if you don't feel like that is happening in your area, or if you have any concerns or questions, then please come and talk to me. I really want to understand what's going on, where the challenges are, and if there's a need for help in any way. But the two core functions are, first of all, that because of that representative function, because of that diversity of views, they must have a mechanism for being informed by and accountable to a wider network of organisations. That could be as low tech as an email distribution list, or as high tech as a regular forum or community of interest. And the second thing that's really important from a third sector representation point of view is that they are knowledgeable about local plans for commissioning and there to ensure that and work hard on behalf of the sector to ensure that they are open, transparent and accessible. And the good practice guidance that we'll go on to talk about in a minute is there to help that role, but that is kind of a bit of a unique function that a third sector rep really needs to be doing. And because of the fact that the routes to commissioning will have such a large impact on the sector. And then where organisations are funded, these are on the right-hand side, some of the additional things that third sector reps might do, depending on their funding agreement with their LEP and local authority. So I'm going to pause now for questions. I'll just stop sharing and we can take 5 minutes again just to see if there's anything that people want to ask or reflect on that before we sort of dive into talking about the commissioning, the good practice guidance on commissioning. Again, no draft questions. Please feel free to chip in. Could I give an example of a third sector representative? Yes, absolutely. So I think we might have some on this call. So Janet, did I see you there? From from Stirling, sorry. Depending on the area, everywhere has a slightly different structure. So some areas have got a funded post within the TSI, and they will have a network of providers that they engage with and connect with, and they will be working closely with the local authority and the LEP around what's happening around employability in their area. Other areas, it might be another role within the third sector interface who takes that on, a capacity building officer or somebody who engages in social enterprise work, for example. It depends. In some areas, it's a third sector organisation alongside a TSI rep that takes that on. And then in some areas, all the third sector funded provision is on the LEP. So it's really incredibly variable, Desi, how that role functions. And that's part of creating this guidance now, is kind of designed to try and help support that and make sure that it's going to be as transparent as possible. Yeah, Janet, do you want to add anything? I'm just trying to see who else is there who takes on those roles.
No, I suppose I can only speak from my point of view, what I do here at Stirling. Can you hear me? It's definitely a sort of coordinating role and making sure that the information flows between the local authority back to the sort of main national group and vice versa. And I think I'm happy to chat, privately in more detail about the role and what to expect for anybody that wants to do that. But I think it is very much dependent on the area. I can say I've been in post about 18 months and it was a bit of a baptism of fire, just getting my head around everything. So I think from my point of view, it's getting your head around the national policy agenda and then working out what the local priorities are in your local authority area, and then working with all the partners to almost define your role so that you can maximise the benefit of having a rep there. So yeah, it's definitely not a one size fits all, but I'd say getting your head round your own area's priorities is definitely one of the first things to do for a rep.
Yeah. Thanks, Janet. Really appreciate that. And Sarah's just noted in the chat there one of the sort of TSIs that are able to do that from from different resourcing. And I think that's the point. Every area and every TSI is so different that it's really important that we allow for the fact that what's going to work in one local authority area is not necessarily going to work in another. And it's about finding what is going to be the right mechanism in each of the different areas. So yeah, Desi, if you want to have a chat about a particular area or have any questions, just let me know. I'll put my email in the chat. Are there any other questions around any of that LEP framework or any other reflections on the rest of it? Did it all make sense? Right, I will move on then to talk about the commissioning framework, so bear with me. So one of the other priorities, as Susan flagged at the beginning of this session, was around the commissioning. So commissioning, as many of you will know, had come up in lots of different research and evaluations of the implementation of No One Left Behind. It had come up as a kind of common challenge that the variability of approaches across different local authorities and some of the particular routes to market that were being used were making it very hard for third sector organizations or other providers to engage in and kind of contribute to the employability pathway. So it was really important and fantastic that this was included in the strategic plan. And it was probably one of the most important things from a third sector perspective that I was keen that we were able to kind of take forward and address. So the first thing we did was we gathered together a kind of collaborative working group. I think it's been mentioned a few times. This has been a really important theme across all of the strategic plan actions, this kind of the value of having those collaborative conversations. So for this particular project, we had local authority commissioning leads, we had Scottish Government, we had National Third Sector Employability Forum members, TSI Network reps, and we had also the lead for URSA in Scotland. So that's the Employability Related Services Association. And we all came together to collectively explore what the problems were across the different parts of the system and come up with a kind of rounded approach in terms of recommendations and solution. And that was absolutely foundational to the guidance that has ended up coming out. So in addition to having that kind of multi-perspectival group, we also did our research. So we looked at what existing good practice guidance there was out there and really kind of considered the pros and cons of the different models and frameworks, and eventually elected to build on the 4 principles in the TSI Fair Funding Charter. And I'll explain why that was important as we kind of go through, but really it provided that rounded perspective of what commissioning is about, not just the bit where we're talking about routes to market. Another thing that became clear in that working group was that sometimes we were using the language a little bit in confusing ways. And even amongst those of us that were quite familiar with talking about commissioning and procurement, we were maybe using those phrases interchangeably when in fact they are kind of two different things. So just to be absolutely clear, commissioning is kind of like the umbrella term which describes all activities related to assessing and forecasting needs, planning the nature, scope and quality of future services, and making sure that investment aligns with agreed outcomes, what we kind of working collaboratively to monitor and review those services. So commissioning is the whole picture. Procurement is one of the ways that you could allocate and manage that funding within the commissioning cycle. And within procurement, there are lots and lots of different routes and frameworks that procurement can apply. But commissioning also includes things like grants and challenge fund processes, and even alliancing. And so we wanted to make sure that we were clear we're talking about commissioning in the whole, of which procurement is one route to market, but so are all these other things. And the principles that we have developed specifically apply to commissioning as a whole and are totally relevant, whether you in a local area is going down a procurement route or whether they're going down a challenge fund or a grant making route. So this was the bit that was really important, that we understand that when we're talking about commissioning, sometimes we can focus on the little bit at the bottom of this cycle, the running of the allocation process. But actually commissioning, the full commissioning cycle really starts when we start thinking about what is it that we need? What is it that we're wanting to, we're wanting to commission? What is the problem we're trying to solve? What are the challenges we're trying to address? What are we looking to kind of do differently in this area? And then once we've understood that, that will help guide deciding how we want to allocate the funding. Different routes to market, different processes for funding are very appropriate for different kinds of solution. So what might be relevant for some kind of off-the-shelf skills training might not be so relevant for a longer-term engagement in an area of multiple deprivation where you're trying to build trust. So identifying the model, identifying the need helps us identify the route to market. Then we have the actual running of the allocation process and making sure that that's happening in an open and transparent way, monitoring and delivery, and then finally and critically, that evaluation, reviewing and informing for future plans. And you will notice, hopefully, that there is a huge synergy in what's in this and what's in that LEP framework that we talked about, to the point of being repetitious. But at the same time, these are points that are worth making, and they are relevant in both these spaces. And perhaps the kind of most important thing that we discovered in our collaborative working group is that when we were looking at the challenges around commissioning, we realised that those challenges are being experienced throughout the system, from Scottish Government right the way down to people who are accessing services and wondering what's happening with the funding. But that they also look different and feel different depending on where you sit in the system. So what might look perfectly reasonable from a Scottish Government perspective might feel very difficult to implement from a local authority perspective, might feel very hard to access from a third sector perspective, and might not feel like it's kind of getting to where it's needed from a service user perspective. And you could do the same all the way back the way. I'm just using that as an example. So we agreed that whatever happened, whatever went into our good practice guidance, it really needed to work for all parts of the employability ecosystem. So a solution which was effective just for third sector, but didn't actually meet the data reporting requirements and governance needs of Scottish Government, wouldn't go into the guidance, and vice versa. And that has made the guidance a bit more lengthy, because we've made it really explicit against each of the recommendations how that helps each of these parts of the ecosystem. So I'm going to dive into the commissioning guidance. I'm afraid it's just me for this bit. So there are 5 kind of core pillars, 4 principles and foundational structures. So the foundational structures absolutely are essential if you can get them in there. What we have seen is that the areas that have these structures in place, really everything else that flows becomes much easier to put in place. So first of all is investment in skilled staff resource within the local authority dedicated to overseeing the commissioning journey and process. Where that is in place, it liberates energy for that person to do that job as well as they absolutely can, and not have kind of split attention between trying to manage internal delivery of services and this kind of more strategic focused planning approach. It also helps address any perceptions around conflict of interest that might come up if the person who's in charge of commissioning is also the person who's in charge of developing the internal team within the local authority. So it's kind of got a win-win on that one. And the second is investing in capacity building for local organisations to be able to kind of play their part in the wider ecosystem. And that might be through funded posts within third sector interfaces, for example, but it could be other ways as well. And I think that came through. We did a survey of organisations and local authorities who were kind of involved in commissioning, and that came through in the feedback. Some of the partners saying, for example, some local suppliers need more support than others to prepare and submit bids, and this is one way for us to address this. Principle 1 ties back to what we were talking about, the kind of data-informed planning with the LEP framework. It's about taking a strategic investment approach so that we're actually planning and understanding what our priorities are well ahead of when we might know what the No One Left Behind budget is, so that we're able to kind of maximise resources into the area. And where there is that co-production of the commissioning strategy, it really helps impact the value for money. It also helps prepare for things like the loss of UK SPF. A few things around the strategic investment approach is that sometimes I think there's a fear that these things should be developed in behind closed doors, because we don't want to be sharing information which might give one organisation or another an advantage. But what we have found is that early engagement with potential providers can be done in a very transparent and accessible and open way, and really make sure that what the resultant approach to commissioning is going to be fit for purpose and accessible, as well as giving those potential providers kind of a buy-in to why you're commissioning, what you're commissioning, and how it matters. And that sort of needing to happen well ahead of the financial year. Principle 2 is about ensuring that whatever route to market we take, it is accessible, it is proportionate, and it is transparent. Again, feedback was this, deciding what is the best route to market might take longer than you think it will, but that's okay, because it's more important to get it right than to do it in a rush. And especially when councils have kind of maybe hierarchical decision-making structures, being really clear about who needs to decide what, where, and when in order to have services ready to go, for example, in March. Sometimes we need to know that in August or September of the year before to make sure that we're going to have our ducks in a row for the right time. A number of local authorities were really commended for the transparency and accessibility of their commissioning routes to market, and they're listed in the annex of the guidance. Doesn't mean there aren't other areas that are doing well, that's just the ones that we got the feedback on. I think things to note once again is that partner input is really important, whether as part of a commissioning subgroup to decide the most appropriate routes to market, or through seeking feedback from the wider sector on things like application forms and processes really makes a difference. Having a level playing field is also important. So ideally, all providers would be expected to go through the same transparent process, no matter what sector they're coming in from. And the LEP would be overseeing that. So you've got kind of transparency in the governance, transparency in the commissioning, transparency in the priorities. Where things have gone well, people have talked about processes, including a scrutiny panel is made up of LEP members, so there's more than one perspective in that, and even including the voice of lived experience through volunteers. I thought I'd put in a little quote on that in here, but I've lost it. Principle 2, continued. Again, just making sure that there's early warning and publication of timelines for commissioning processes. So, if we know something is going to go live in June, even if we don't know the exact date, letting people know that as early as possible can be really helpful, and make sure that organisations can plan their work schedule their annual leave even around when that might be going live. So even if it might have a tight commissioning timeframe, having that process is really, really useful. Again, everything else here you think would be relatively straightforward around clear and published assessment criteria and so on. I think one of the things here is also just the importance of having a kind of a relationship with the commissioning process, that it doesn't have to have a strong firewall. So that could be explanations around if and why decisions have been successful or unsuccessful, but it could also be about dialogue around, you know, you're going to be successful. Could we have a conversation about how we might adapt the delivery model? Recognize that can be really, really tricky at times, but actually it can also allow for nuance and adaptation, especially if things like grant funding, sort of, you know, funding things disappear or reappear suddenly. A big point there is, though, from the third sector perspective, is that dialogue shouldn't be about negotiating people down once you've given them an award. It might be more about how do we adapt what we're doing to fit the wider pathway of other commission services. So yeah. And then we've talked about equitable timelines in both commissioning, but also in closure. So sometimes this has come up at the moment in terms of some national funding. It's really important that people get given enough time to wind down services in a proportionate and safe way for both staff and clients. And it's not just kind of left to the last minute, or even sometimes sort of maybe after the fund has ended. There we are. That's where my little quote came in. So that's just one of the survey respondents talking about the value of the lived experience panel and ensuring that kind of they had that multi-perspectival approach. Nearly done. Principle 3, adequate and secure funding. This is really important. Full cost recovery approaches are absolutely critical to the sustainability of the sector and our ecosystems of support, and particularly that's impactful for providers, but also for the people that they are there supporting. There is no support if they don't survive, and if they don't survive, there is no support. So there are three main bits in here. It's quite straightforward. So first is around full cost recovery. So that means making sure that when we're paying organisations for their support, we're allowing them to consider the full costs that are associated with that support. And that would include admin or management fees or overheads that are associated with the delivery of that support. Clear payment schedules are also in there. Quarterly in arrears is the minimum. Some areas do give a little payment in advance for a startup, for a smaller organisation, which is absolutely fantastic practice. But the quarterly in arrears is a minimum. That is how local authorities are funded. So if anybody's asking, and sometimes they do, that's useful to know. And then obviously we have got in there multi-annual. We recognise that is easier to say and much harder to do. Scottish Government colleagues are working hard to try and get that in place for us nationally. Some local authorities do feel able to make that commitment and take that risk. Others don't, and we have to work with what's possible and with the art of the possible on that one. Principle 4 is just about proportionate evaluation and reporting. So we talked about the continuous improvement mindset when we were talking about the LEPs, but really other kind of seemingly quite minor things might be around just agreeing the data reporting requirements at the outset of a programme and not changing them midway through. Again, sometimes that can come nationally down, not just from within an area, but recognising that's good practice. Trying to make sure that data requirements are as person-centred and appropriate as possible to the scale of the funding and the pathway provision. Making sure that we're looking at feedback from service users and that's embedded in our processes, not just an add-on at the end. And then there are areas who are using CRM systems to help gather and capture data. And in some of those areas, they have training for providers, and they also have kind of like contact points for when there are challenges and issues. And that seems to work really well and means that better data for providers, better data for the local authority, and then better data for Scottish Government. So that's kind of a bit of a win-win. And then finally, financial evidence on spend is proportionate and reasonable whilst being robust. some people say the devil is in the detail. I am going to say the awesomeness is in the annexes, because the two bits that I really want people to pay attention to, we quite often ignore the annexes, but actually there are two really awesome annexes in the good practice guidance for commissioning. One is putting the principles into practice, and that lists examples of local authority areas who are already doing this work, recognizing that nowhere is going to be doing it perfectly, because we're talking beyond gold standard in terms of what's in here, but that there are areas that are doing this work, and so it's great to be able to kind of say, actually, do you know what, that's happening over there, I might like to go and find out about that. So that's really, really useful. And the second thing is there is a summary of the different routes to market. So that includes all the different procurement framework models that are available in Scotland. It's different to England, and also a few bits about challenge funds and grants. I think the big point that we would say with all of those is it's possible to do procurement and challenge fund grant making well, and it's also possible to do both of them less well. So it's less about what is the route and much more about its appropriateness and its ability to kind of apply to these principles here. I am going to pause again. I have no idea how I'm doing on timing. I'm going to stop sharing and just see if there are any questions. And also I'm going to invite Susie to clarify, just in case there's anything I missed, because there's a few bits I was in my notes and I was like, I don't know if I've said all the things I need to say.
No, I think you've covered the most part, and I think just a reminder that all of these documents are available for you to go through with a fine-tooth comb and come back to myself or Pegs on anything. And just, I suppose, a huge thank you to all of the working groups that have been involved in developing the good practice guidance, the LEP framework, everyone. I mean, there's been so many people involved in it, and I'm going to go on to talk about the comms group as well, that if you are interested, because we have representation from the majority of key partner organisations on each of these groups, so if you are interested, speak to myself or Pegs, or if you're DWP, speak to Lorna Gilmore, and if you're SDS, speak to Yvonne Boyd, and they'll be able to give you the heads up onto whether there are opportunities for you to be involved in any of this.
Absolutely. Thanks, Susie. That's really important. Epi.
I just wanted to ask a question about the thing that you mentioned about management, because we recently have done an application to one of the LEPs and it explicitly wouldn't allow management. And of course, I mean, I'm sort of preaching converted here, Pegs, I know that, but particularly as a lived experience led organisation like we are, management is actually really important, because the support and supervision of staff when they can be supporting people that can be quite triggering from them is actually like essential. Why is the discrepancy there? I mean, if it's in the good practice guidance, like why is it not being followed?
Well, I think the first thing is to say the good practice guidance is brand new, and it was developed because there is a lot of variability in approaches across Scotland and local authorities, and sometimes that's to do with what is possible within a local authority area, and sometimes that's to do with I guess understanding and implementation of some of the guidance from Scottish Government. I think sometimes it wasn't very helpful at the outset. Sorry, Scottish Government colleagues. But just I think on that note, we are aware that there is this has come up as kind of one of the areas that some further advice might be interesting and useful around. I'm away to work with the TSI Network colleagues to see if we can come up with some guidance which is going to be useful and helpful around that. But I'm happy to have a chat with you about that kind of out with this call, but recognize that that is the reality in some areas. It just is variable. So yeah. Sarah.
Hi, I was just following on from that comment really around full cost recovery. I've spent 25 years in England and just recently come back up north, and full cost recovery is few and far between. So it's getting increasingly difficult for third sector organisations to, include their overheads, any management fees, admin costs, just like Epi was saying. And sometimes the value of the contract or the grant is sometimes you've got to say no, unfortunately. So I would really welcome some further work and getting involved in some guidance around full cost recovery for organisations and the LEPs as well.
That's fab. Consider yourself one of my first volunteers, Sarah. Brilliant. Any other comments or questions before I hand over to Susie to talk about the communications tools?
Go back over to me then. I promise you this is the last section, and I'll try and keep it as brief as possible because you've been bombarded with a lot of information. So in the strategic plan, there was quite a couple of actions that were relevant to comms, and I suppose the most valuable one being increasing awareness and uptake of employability support, and leading a collective approach to consistent communication, basically. So I'm going to give you a wee bit of a spotlight on the work of the cross-sector employability communications group. Great title. We need to do something about these titles of these working groups. But I mean, we've got representation from a few local authorities, quite a few third sector organisations, Scottish Government. We've got DWP SDS, we've got Scottish Training Federation, who then cascades information back out to their members, and we've got 2 lived experience members on our group from Aberdeenshire. The group was established last January to take forward a couple of the actions within the strategic plan around better comms, mainly to support more consistent messaging across all partners. The group meets 6 to 8 weekly and have already shared a couple of tools to support better, more consistent messaging across all partners involved in the delivery of employability in Scotland. Next slide, thank you. So this is just a wee highlight of one of the first things that we've managed to publish, which we've kind of just classed it as a comms toolkit. And it's good practice suggestions for use when developing future marketing and communications to ensure clarity of messaging. It's broken down in 4 sections to consider when developing or reviewing your online marketing offer, and it's broken down into content, design, structure, and system. Now, this was a huge piece of work that was undertaken by our lived experience members on the comms group. They spent hours reviewing local and national employability websites from local authorities, third sector, and other delivery partners such as SDS, DWP, and colleges. Now, they ripped them apart. They said, that doesn't look good because it's black and white. That one's too formal. The wording's really rubbish. It's really difficult to navigate. They basically told us everything that we shouldn't be doing, and made a really, really valuable suggestions to how we could just change it. And a lot of it was just about making sure that it was really easy to navigate and really clear. So the toolkit has been published, and it's on the Improvement Service website, so we'll send you all the links. But that was I think for us, it was a real eye-opener about how valuable the voice of lived experience really was, because as officers, we think we're doing the right thing, but until you take it away from the language that we're using every day, that we understand, and putting it out in the public domain, and they're like, what even does that mean? So that, I think, for me, has been the most valuable lesson to learn. Next slide, please. So the group have developed introductory paragraphs, 3 versions, so aimed at service users and prospective participants, professionals and referral partners, and a final one for employers and business. And these are for use on websites, digital and physical marketing, that are straightforward, clear and simple English. Basically, they outline what's on offer from employability services. A couple of councils have already used the good practice guidance that we've just mentioned, and are really hoping to use the introductory paragraphs and when they update their websites. They're really supportive of the clarity provided through the paragraphs. They all kind of follow a similar pattern, if you like, although they're aimed at 3 different client groups. We're also developing a national communications plan. So this is to support and complement local plans and comms strategies, supporting better reach and offering tools for raising awareness of no one left behind and employability services. So really to encourage collaboration across public, private and third sector, and also to support better communication to and with employers as a partner. So it's a work in progress, and it will be shared once it's more fully formed. We've got a kind of working draft just now, but it's not in any means ready to be shared with anyone. We still need to understand ourselves what value this can add and where we need to invest some more energy. It's also really important that we put more effort into celebrating successes. So I think that the comms plan will cover that. So sharing actual people's stories and the impact of employability services is one of the best ways to do this, to publicise our services. We're also looking at trying to agree a Scottish Employability Day. So based on the success of the 2024 day, which was held in September 24, where over half of all LEP areas took part. So this was on the back of the ERSA Employability Day, which is a National Employability Day, and it had been postponed from June due to the election. So I think that the overall thought was that September is quite a good time to have this. So we're looking to agree a date to celebrate Scottish employability. So look out for a future survey so we can try and agree a day or a week for 2026. And the final action, I suppose, that the group is responsible for taking forward is to review and support further development to ensure our messaging is clear, understandable and relevant to those we're trying to reach. As I say, it's back to that plain, simple English. It definitely requires input from service providers and users at both a local and a national level. So some of this might include national leaflets or posters, or adoption of a video or animation that can be used by every area. There's lots more discussion and consultation with all our partners to be had in the year ahead. But I hope you'll agree it's a really valuable piece of work, and as I say, a very much work in progress. So keep your eyes and ears peeled for more information on that.
Thank
don't
you,
think there's
Susie.
anything else yet.
No, I think I think one of the things that became really clear, and if there's anything that anybody takes away from this, from our work on that group, was whatever you're doing around comms, get it checked by people who are actually using your services, because you might think it makes sense, but it really might not. So I'm going to skip over the next opportunity for questions and just kind of touch on some recordings that might be useful and some of the kind of what's coming next for the strategic plan priorities. And then we'll pause for questions and final reflections. And also we want to get your feedback about what would be useful from your perspective going forward. So, so first of all, I was just reflecting on the themes that are in here and looking back at some of the previous thematic workshops that we've done, and with the support of Social Enterprise Scotland, we're able to record. And these all feel very pertinent to the issues that we've talked about, whether it's service design, whether it's commissioning, whether it's how do we use data for learning. Really, do encourage you, if you have time, to dive into one or any of these, and you might find it useful. It will certainly add to and kind of complement what we've been talking about here. And I also need to flag, and I don't know if Jane, you'd be able to pop in the chat, we have a lived experience thematic workshop on lived experience panels coming up on the 24th of February, I think, and the booking link can go into the chat. So that is, again, relevant to the service design, relevant to the assessment stuff, relevant to how you bring that voice into the work you're doing. So hopefully some of you will sign up for that. In terms of the strategic plan priorities, the one I've forgotten to put on here is growing our ability to implement service design in the field of employability, but that is an ongoing priority. We do have a community of practice around that. If that's something you're interested in, then contact myself. Other things we've talked about, work on communications plan, continuing to implement and support the implementation of the commissioning guidance is going to be really important. And then there are other strands of work that are kind of more emergent. So looking at skills and qualifications for the sector, and how do we want to get, what do we want to get in terms of consistency, or just kind of improving the visibility of skills and quals for the sector. Looking at guidance on employer recruitment incentives in the broadest sense, looking at that work on refining the shared measurement framework. And then kind of there's this bigger picture stuff around the public sector integration and public sector reform, and then employer engagement and net zero, which are also in the strategic plan. So basically, there is you know, there is a lot that has been done, even just in this last 12 months. It's built on work that has been going on for years. And so, you know, it hasn't come from nowhere. You know, people have been working in this field and trying to get things better for a long time. But we have finally managed to kind of get some really fantastic stuff going forward as a result of the strategic plan and the collaborative input from so many different people to kind of help move these things forward. So a lot has been done, but there's a lot still to do. And I, for one, am really looking forward to working with colleagues in both the local authority, Scottish Government, third sector, Skills Development Scotland, DWP, colleges, everyone, all in between to help continue that journey. So we wanted to end with a space for your reflections. So maybe thoughts about what else might help with implementing some of these new tools. Maybe something around some of the challenges that you're seeing on the ground, and maybe something about ideas for future workshops or future webinars that myself, Susie, Jane could help kind of bring to life to help you in your work. So I'm going to open the floor for that and stop sharing. And we've got, how much time have we got? We've got 5 minutes left. So yeah. Any thoughts and reflections, much appreciated. And also questions about the comms work too.
If I can just come in, so thematic workshops, Pegs and I have both been running them individually and together. So it is often, we're often quite reactive in bringing these thematic workshops to bear. So if there is any pressing subject, topic, theme that you think would be worthwhile us getting speakers in, then please let us know. And for the most part, we open the sessions out to everyone, although some are more specific for third sector partners, others are more specific for local government or other strategic partners. So whatever you think would be useful to help support your work, Pegs and I are happy to try and bring that together, whether it's strategic, whether it's operational, whether it's sharing the best practice, whether it's sharing of challenges, whatever you think would be useful for you, let us know. Yeah, absolutely. And those colleagues from Skills Development Scotland, just to give you a heads up, we've had a request for one on you guys. So we did one on DWP policy, kind of DWP 101 just before Christmas. So, you know, there's opportunities for, as we say, something which is quite practical and just helping everybody understand the different parts that we all play in the system. So yeah, Jane has very kindly popped the link to the evaluation in the chat. There's an opportunity there to add in thoughts around future workshops as well, or any feedback you have, anything we can do to make future sessions better and more effective. And I don't know, I'm not seeing any hands shooting up. In which case, last chance, folks. Okay, well, in that case, it leaves me to just thank our co-speakers. So Susan and Marie for Scottish Government, thank you so much. And Susie, who is second day back from holidays, thank you. Never again for stepping up. And thank you to everybody here for everything that you do. It really does genuinely make a difference. Every single bit of the picture is what matters. And I think we've really seen that in developing these collaborative products, which we hope will help you in your work. All the best. And you can have 3 whole minutes back to your day. Cheers.